In a quiet town, a black waitress struggled to make ends meet, did what none else dared. She served a hot meal to a homeless veteran. Everyone else had turned away. Fired in silence, she walked out into the rain. Seemed forgotten. But the next morning, 200 soldiers appeared outside the diner. They didn't come to eat. They came to honor the woman who restored dignity to a forgotten hero. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thought. Blue Ridge, Georgia, wasn't the kind of town you found on postcards. The sidewalks cracked like old skin. The gas station clock had been broken for 3 years, and the main diner, Maple's Diner, still ran on the same coffee machine from the Carter administration. It was a place where nothing big ever happened, and folks liked it that way. You kept your head down, paid your bills, and didn't ask for more than what you were given. Ruby Walker knew this routine well. She was 32, 5'6" on a good day, with tired eyes and a long brown braid that she tied tight every morning like it was holding her together. Her apron, once white, had faded into a permanent shade of beige, no matter how many times she scrubbed it. She had worked the opening shift at Maple's Diner for nearly 8 years. Always first in, always last out. Her hands knew the feel of the coffee, pot handle better than they knew comfort. Her knuckles were rough, her shoes worn to the thread, but she kept showing up. He lived in a rented room above an auto garage where the heater worked half the time and the faucet screamed when turned too fast. Her only companion was a grey tabby named Duke, who had one ear and the attitude of a retired boxer. At night, she would feed him a spoon of tuna, then lie on Hurtwin mattress and stare at the ceiling, whispering the same thing. "We're okay, we're still okay." Ruby didn't speak much at work unless someone spoke to her first. She didn't gossip with the other waitresses, didn't complain when her paycheck came short, and didn't flinch when the cook cursed loud enough for the street to hear. People thought she was quiet because she had nothing to say. But Ruby noticed everything. She noticed the man in booth 4 who stirred his coffee 5 times before taking a sip, and the waitress who only smiled when the tips were good. She noticed bruises on the new dishwasher's arm that didn't come from work. And she noticed every single person who walked in with wet shoes, shaking hands, and that same hollow look that said they hadn't had a warm place to sit in days. That's why, when the door creaked open, just after 6:30, that Tuesday morning, Ruby didn't need to be told something was wrong. The wind swept through the diner like it had a purpose. Rain slapped against the windows, and in the doorway stood a mano. One else wanted to see. He wore an old army coat soaked through at the shoulders, heavy with water. His left leg dragged slightly as he stepped forward, and his beard was straw with gray and neglect. His hands trembled. Ash took off a knit cap and held it against his chest like it was the last decent thing he owned. A small crumpled paper bag was tucked under his arm. He didn't look at anyone. Most of the diners turned away quickly, pretending to read menus they already knew by heart. One woman coughed awkwardly. A man at the counter stirred sugar into his coffee like he didn't hear the bell chime at all. Ruby didn't move right away. She finished wiping the counter, folded her towel neatly, then walked toward the man. Her boots squeaked slightly on the wet floor, but her steps were steady. The man paused beside a booth near the back. He didn't sit. He looked around like he was waiting to be told to leave. Ruby stopped beside him. "Good morning," she said gently. His voice was barely louder than the rain outside. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wondered if maybe I could get a cup of hot water and if there's any bread, old bread you were going to throw out." "I don't need much." Ruby's throat tightened. The voice, the coat, the way he stood straight back, despite the limp. It all reminded her of her grandfather. A man who fought in Korea came back with a crooked spine and a sense of duty that never left. His bones. She nodded once. "Let me see what I can do." Back in the kitchen, a plate of chicken and biscuits sat under the heat lamp. A customer had sent it back 2 minutes earlier, said the gravy was too thick. Ruby didn't ask permission. She slid the food onto a clean plate, added a buttered roll, and poured a cup of black coffee. Her hands didn't shake. She placed everything neatly on a tray with a cloth napkin and carried it out like it was the most normal thing in the world. When she set it down in front of him, the man's eyes widened. "I can't pay for this," he said. "You don't have to," Ruby replied. "It was going to waste. The coffee's on me." He stared at the food for a long time before picking up the fork. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "You remind me of my wife," he said, voice cracking. "She used to say, 'Everyone deserves warmth.' Especially the ones who've lived through too much cold." Ruby nodded, then turned back toward the counter. Behind her, the owner of Thedina, Harlan Blake, had stepped out of his office. His face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the booth in the back. The air in the diner changed. Ruby felt it before she heard it. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harlan's voice cut through the clatter of dishes like a blade. Ruby turned slow and calm. "He's a veteran," she said. "He asked for hot water. I gave him food we were throwing out anyway. This ain't a soup kitchen," Harlan snapped. "You think we got customers to spare? You feed one like him, next thing you know, there's 5 more lined up outside." "I paid for the coffee," Ruby said, her voice low but clear. "Take it out of my tips." Harlan stepped forward, his face now. "You don't get to make that call. You don't get to decide what this place stands for. You made me look soft." He jabbed a finger toward the door. "You're done. Pack your stuff and get out." Ruby didn't argue. Her hands were steady as she untied her apron, folded it once, and set it on the counter. Noon said a word, not the customers, not the staff, just the sound of rain and the hum of the refrigerator. She walked out into the storm with her head held high, the sound of the diner's bell jangling behind her like a final in. And inside her coat pocket, the veteran's dog tag pressed against her palm. The rain was relentless, coming down in sheets that blurred the cracked sidewalk and washed cigarette butts into the gutter. Ruby stood under the narrow awning outside Maple's diner, soaked to the knees, her apron now folded over her arm like a flag. She had been forced to lower. Her breath fogged in the air, shallow and tight in her chest. She didn't cry. She wouldn't. Not here. But inside, something was burning, slow and bitter. Behind her, the lights of the diner glowed yellow and indifferent. Inside, people went back to their egg sand coffee, as if nothing had happened. Ruby could still see them through the fogged window. Mr. Halpin stirring his 4th packet of sugar, the Henderson couple whispering behind their hands, and Harlan, her former boss, slamming the register drawer shut like he had won something. Ruby's fingers curled tighter around the canvas of her apron. Her heart thudded in her chest, not just from anger, but from the sting of being cast aside like she was nothing. Not one person had stood up. Not one voice had said, she was right. The silence had hurt more than the shouting. She turned to leave, her canvas sneakers squelching with each step when she heard it. A soft rustling sound from the alley. She paused, heart suddenly racing. Then out of the dimness, the old man emerged, his coat still damp, his gait unsteady. Raymond Cole, he looked smaller now, hunched more than before, like the storm had reached inside and taken something from him. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice low and rasp from the cold. "Should have said something, should have done more." He avoided her eyes as if ashamed. Ruby shook her head. Her throat was tight, and it took effort to speak. "You didn't do anything wrong." Raymond stepped closer, unzipping his coat with slow fingers. He reached into the inner pocket and pulled something out. An old military dog tag, dulled by time and worn, smooth at the edges. He placed it in Ruby's hand with both of his. "You reminded me I'm still a person," he said, "that I ain't completely invisible. I don't have anything else, but I want you to have this. Just in case I don't make it through this winter, Someone ought to know I wash her. Ubi stood still, feeling the weight of the tag in her palm. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe it just felt that way because everything did now. She watched as Raymond turned and disappeared into the rain, his figure swallowed by shadows and streetlight. That night, Ruby sat on the edge of Herbed, her clothes hanging over a rusted chair to dry. Duke curled against her hip, purring faintly, sensing the unrest. Her tiny room smelled like wet socks and exhaustion. The light from the street lamp outside painted thin orange bars across the wall. She held the dog tag up to the window, reading the faint lettering etched into the metal, R. Cole, U.S. Army. The rest was smudged, unreadable. She checked her phone. Bank account $42. Rent due in 10 days. No job, no insurance, no backup. Her stomach grumbled, but she ignored it. In the silence, she whispered, "We're still okay." Though for the first time, she wasn't sure she believed it. The next morning, she woke early out of habit. Her body had already learned to move before her mind could question why. She brewed a cup of instant coffee, fed Duke the last spoon of tuna, and sat by the window, watching the town wake up. She didn't plan on going back to the diner. That door had closed. But the town that was still open, it was still watching. She pulled on her coat, the dog tag in her pocket like a reminder pressed against her thigh. She walked the long route through downtown, past shuttered storefronts and empty benches, past faces she'd served for years, who now glanced at her like she was someone new, someone they didn't want to remember. She stopped at the job board outside the town library. Nothing posted. Same as yesterday. She visited 3 diners. One manager smiled awkwardly, apologized, said the position was already filled. Another barely looked at her before muttering, "We can't risk the publicity." At the last place, the owner slid the application form back toward her halfway through and nodded toward the door. Ruby stood outside in the cold with her empty folder tucked under her arm, wondering if doing the right thing had just cost her everything. As the sun began to set, she passed the old bus shelter near Main Street. Hunched under a sheet of plastic was Raymond, trying to sleep with one arm over his chest and the other curled around his paper bag like it was made of glass. Ruby crouched beside him. She unwrapped half a sandwich from her coat pocket, the only food she had left that day, and set it gently beside him. He stirred, but didn't wake. "Thank you for remembering me," she whispered. She stood up, turned, and walked away, unaware of the black SUV idling quietly at the corner. Behind its tinted windows, a man in uniform watched her disappear into the dark. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, and said only 6 words. "We've found him." And her too. The video hit the internet by mid-morning, brainy, shaky, filmed from a phone pressed against a purse strap, but it was clear enough. Ruby standing beside the old man's table offering a plate. The owner's voice rising, the words, "You're fired," echoing loud enough to cut through the low hum of the diner. Her expression steady, respectful, but clearly shaken. It didn't take long. By noon, it had already been shared across 3 community pages tagged with captions like "Waitress defies boss to feed homeless" and "Diner drama in Blue Ridge." At first, there were a few kind comments, people saying she had a good heart. A handful of strangers clapped back at the owner, calling him cold. But then came the tide. Rules are rules. I should have asked permission first. Bet this isn't the first time she's handed out food for free. Not her job to play hero. Let's be honest. If we give food to every vet on the street, we'll be out of business by Thursday. She read them all on her cracked screen, sitting in the same plastic chair where she used to eat instant noodles after double shifts. The warmth from her tiny space heater couldn't reach her hands. Her phone vibrated. A message from someone she used. "To work with at Maple's Diner. Just 5 words. Always trying to be special. No greeting, no support, just that." She stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, just empty. Then she set the phone face down on the floor and leaned back, her head pressing into the wall behind her. Her shoulders ached, her eyes burned, but still no tears. She had done what was right. She knew that. But now it felt like the whole town had flipped the script, turned her into some selfish rebel who had gone looking for a spotlight. And it wasn't just online. She had applied at 3 more diners that morning, places that once would have welcomed someone with her experience. 2 never returned her call. The third, Peterson's Deli, let her come in to fill out the application. The manager, a soft-voiced woman in her 50s, took one look at her name on the form, hesitated, then said gently, "I'm sorry, Ruby, with everything going on online, we just can't risk the attention right now. It's not personal, but it felt personal." By sundown, Ruby was walking the back streets of Blue Ridge, her coat zipped up to her chin, her breath visible in the cooling air. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe just movement, maybe just proof that the world still turned. She passed closed hardware stores, an old movie theater now boarded up, a laundromat humming with fluorescent light. Her boots were damp, her fingers hurt from the cold, and then she saw him, purled under a plastic sheet in the corner of the old bus stop. Raymond Cole was asleep, or trying to be. One arm was wrapped over his chest, the other clutched that same torn paper bag. His coat was still soaked through. His beard bristled against his collar. Ruby paused. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the last thing she had on her, a sandwich wrapped in newspaper tied with a fraying piece of string. She crouched slowly, careful not to wake him, and placed it beside him like an offering. Then, almost without thinking, she leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for remembering me." She stood and turned, the wind pushing her hair into her eyes. Her shoulders were slumped now, not from weakness, but from carrying too many questions with no answers. A pair of headlights cut across the street behind her. She didn't turn. Inside the black SUV, the man in uniform. Colonel Mason Cole watched through the windshield. His face was unreadable. He held the phone to his ear again. "Yes," he said quietly. "She's still in town." He paused, eyes never leaving Ruby. "She doesn't know who Hayes." Another pause. "She doesn't even know we're watching." He ended the call, then remained there in the silence, listening to the engine idle, the rain tick softly against the glass, and the waitress, who didn't cry, who gave away her last meal, and walked into the cold alone. It started with a sound no one in Blue Ridge was used to hearing that early in the morning. The low, steady hum of engines, not the kind from delivery trucks, or the occasional school bus, but heavier, synchronized, purposeful. 8 exactly 6:45 a.m., the first black SUV turned onto Main Street. Then another, then 4 more. By the time the town clock struck 7, the entire block in front of Maple's Diner was lined with vehicles. Doors opened, boots hit pavement, and suddenly the town that had looked away from Ruby Walker 2 days earlier now couldn't look away at all. People stopped mid-step on the sidewalk. The drugstore owner stepped outside with a cup of coffee, shaking slightly in his hand. A group of teenagers heading to school froze at the corner, their conversation cut off mid-joke. Curtains parted in upstairs windows, cameras lifted. They came. The soldiers, Colonel Mason Cole, the whole street's blocked off. "You have to come." Ruby thought it was a mistake. She looked down at her sweater, her old jeans, her hair not yet brushed. "Why?" she asked, but they were already leading her downstairs. When she stepped onto the sidewalk, the world changed. The line of soldiers parted like a tide, and then, as one, they raised their hands in salute. Every single one. 200 men and women in uniform, saluting a waitress. Ruby froze, her chest tightened. Her feet refused to move. Colonel Cole stepped forward, holding the black case. "Miss Walker," he said, voice soft but steady. "My father asked that this be given to you. He said you saw him when no one else did. He said you reminded him what dignity feels like." Ruby shook her head, eyes brimming. "I didn't do anything." "You did more than enough," he replied. Then gently, he placed the silver star in her hands. That moment didn't need applause. It didn't need headlines. It was already echoing deeper than any of that. By the end of the day, Maple's Diner had closed its doors for good. Orders were canceled. The staff resigned. One by one, veterans picketed out front. Heron Blake left town 3 days later without a word, without a goodbye. But Ruby never gloated. She never posted a thing. She didn't speak to the cameras or give a statement. She just went home, held Duke in her arms, set the medal beside Raymond's dog tag, and let herself breathe for the first time in days. A few days later, a man from a veteran non-profit organization knocked on her door. He wore plain clothes, but spoke with the calm steadiness of someone who had seen too much and survived it. He said, "We saw what you did. Not the video, not the headlines. What? You really did. You didn't feed him on. You gave him back his dignity. And we'd like to build something around that." She didn't say yes right away. She spent the night holding Raymond's dog tag in one hand and Duke's paw in the other. By morning, she knew her answer. She didn't take the job for recognition. She didn't do it to prove anything. She did it because for the first time in a long time, she was given a choice. To walk away or to help build a place where no one else would ever have to feel invisible the way she had. So she rolled up her sleeves, scrubbed the sinks, took inventory, painted walls. She said yes because someone needed to. And this time, she wasn't waiting for permission. Used to store broken vending machines. Its roof leaked in 3 places, and the floor creaked when you walked too hard. But now light poured from its windows every evening, spilling warm onto the sidewalk. Laughter echoed off the walls. The smell of cornbread, chili, and freshly brewed coffee filled the air like a promise. Inside, Ruby Walker stood behind the counter of the Blue Ridge Community Kitchen. She wore no uniform, no name tag, just a clean apron and a hair tie, holding back. The same long braid. Her hands moved with purpose, steady and sure, stirring soup, setting down trays, patting the shoulders of regulars. Her eyes, once dulled by routine and fatigue, were clearer now. Not sparkly, just steady, strong. She hadn't asked for any of this. The veteran-founded non-profit that offered her the job said they'd seen the video, but more importantly, they'd seen her. Seen what kind of person she was. They gave her the space. She gave it a soul. Now every afternoon the doors opened and people walked in. Not to spend, not to be judged, just to eat. Some were veterans, some were mothers, some were kids who stopped. Talking at home and only spoke here where it felt safe. Volunteers came in waves. A retired nurse stirred pots beside a high schooler doing community service. A former Marine peeled potatoes next to a teenage girl who'd never met someone in uniform until last week. No one asked about the past. They asked if you'd had enough to eat. And in the corner, always watching, always still, Duke, Theoneared tabby, lay on a shelf near the window, his eyes half-lidded, his body stretched long across a pile of clean towels. He was old, like the building, but he seemed content, like he belonged. Every so often, Raymond Cole came to visit. He no longer slept in the street. With help from his son and the VA, Hino had a bed, regular care, and meals that didn't come from dumpsters. When Hecka made to the kitchen, he didn't speak much. He just sat near the back, sipping black coffee, nodding. At Ruby when their Riez met. Sometimes he brought another vet. Sometimes he just listened to the room around him. Ruby didn't ask questions. She just made sure his mug stayed full. 1 week after the morning, the soldiers saluted her. Just after Warcam in the afternoon, the front door creaked open. A little boy walked in. Couldn't have been older than 8. Sandy. Hair, oversized sneakers, a serious look that didn't quite fit his face. He walked up to the counter where Ruby was wiping down a tray. He didn't speak at first, just reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill folded carefully in thirds. Then pulled out a cookie wrapped in wax paper and tied with string. "I saw you in the video." he said. His voice was high but steady. My grandpa was a soldier, used to help people, so I wanted to help someone too. He set the dollar and the cookie on the counter, looking up at her with wide, unsure eyes. Can I use this to help someone else? Ruby couldn't speak. Not yet. Her chest rose slowly. She looked down at the cookie, then the dollar, then the boy's hands, then back at his face. She placed her hand over her heart and gave him a single nod. That was all. Later that night, as the kitchen quieted and the last dishes were rinsed, Ruby sat alone in her small office. On the desk sat a wooden box. Inside it was a neatly folded American flag, a silver star in its black case, and a single dog tag with worn lettering pressed into the metal. She didn't touch them often, but tonight she did. She held the tag in her hand and whispered, "We're still okay," just like she had before. But this time, her voice didn't crack. This time she believed it. The world hadn't changed overnight. It never did. But something had shifted. Thediner that once shamed her now stood dark. The open 24-hour sign cracked and sun faded. A dusty for-lease notice flapped behind the glass. No one missaid it. No one mentioned it. But across town in the old warehouse filled with noise and purpose, people came every day to eat, to talk, to feel visible. Ruby never became famous. She never sought attention. But those who passed through the kitchen knew her. Not just the woman from the video, but the woman who served quietly, who remembered their names, who gave without question. Because some people shout to be seen, and some, like Ruby Walker, change the world without ever raising their voice. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.